When we think about the 18th century, certain names pop into our head. In politics, we might think about George Washington or Thomas Jefferson. If we're thinking about scientific things, we might think about Benjamin Franklin or Isaac Newton, or possibly literature with Defoe and Swift. But what about an important name, a name that would make a difference in people's lives, millions of people's lives for over 100 years? That name is Hannah Glasse. The first edition of The Art of Cookery was published in 1747. This cookbook was foundational to the concept of modern cookbooks. It is the most popular cookbook in the 18th century that's printed in English. It is got all of the classic recipes in it. In fact, if you think about the channel that we do here in 18th century cookery, 95% of what we do in food is based on something that was either in the art of cookery or was a recipe that was established and modified from the art of cookery. It's just amazing how much circles back to Hannah Glasse's cookbook. She is writing this cookbook not to the typical person that earlier cookbooks were written to. If you think about cookbooks from, say, the 17th century or cookbooks in the early 18th century, a lot of them were specifically written to very high-end chefs and cooks. They were written for basically royalty or extremely rich people. So this cookbook, she aims not at poor people, but at least she expects the people that are reading the cookbook to not be highly educated in cookery. And so she changes the language. So remember, she's not coming up with every one of these recipes. A third of her original first edition cookbook are recipes that she pulled from other cookbooks in the time period. So they're written in exactly that same fashion. But sometimes she changes the language, and she is picking out recipes that she knows that the lower sort, as she would say, would be able to understand them. So there is so much that's interesting. She's really changing the audience for a cookbook, and that changes the popularity of it. Of course, it's got a much larger audience than a cookbook that's just meant for royalty. This recipe book has some real firsts and standouts. Even for a cookbook from 1747, she has the first English recipe for a curry that we know of. She also has some other foreign recipes that sort of pop out. In some editions, there is a kebab recipe. She also has the first time the term Yorkshire pudding pops up. She has some specific recipes for something like a Christmas pudding, which is kind of rare for recipes in the time period. She does include one or two recipes for medicine. Unlike most recipe books, which sort of have a whole chapter of medicinal recipes, she actually points out, she says, I'm not a doctor here. I don't want to fill this book up with physic, as they would say in the time period. So she just has a recipe for the bitings of a mad dog and for plague water, both things that you obviously really need in your cookbook. She does have a chapter on food for the sick, so simple things that are easy to digest. She also has a full chapter on foods that are good for people that are going to sea. If you're going to be a sea captain or going to be on board a ship for a long period of time, she has recipes that will be good for that. She also has a very, very early reference to using vanilla in cookery, which really wasn't done much in English or American cookery in the 18th century, so that's a kind of a first there. And she uses jelly in the floating island or a trifle recipe. So there are a lot of really, really interesting recipes here, very influential for all kinds of cooking for well over 100 years after this is printed.
Our first recipe out of this pretty incredible cookbook today is for a broth that is trying to recreate everything that a cullis will give you. What's going on with a cullis, if you don't know what that is, number one, no matter what the internet says, this is not pronounced coulis in our time period, it's pronounced cullis. And it is a broth that is super rich, and it is an expensive broth, sometimes using a whole leg of lamb or veal and a ham, like a whole ham. These things are pretty incredible. We've made it on the channel before, so you can go back and look at that. But She's trying to get you there without spending nearly as much money, but it does have a lot of ingredients and there's a lot going on. So we're gonna jump right into it and see what this tastes like. Now, the tasting of this will actually be at the very end of the video because it's gonna have to cook for a long time. The recipe is super long, it's complicated. We're gonna summarize it best we can here. Now, there is an order to how these things are layered. I don't know that it's necessarily important to follow in that order, but we're going to do that just because she's pretty verbatim about it. What we're gonna do first, get half a pound of bacon in the very bottom of our Dutch oven. We're using a Dutch oven because it's really the only thing that we have in the kitchen that's deep enough and has a lid, but you can do whatever at home. And then we're gonna layer veal or beef. And they even call for a double layer of that. So we're just gonna cut a lot of this up and put that in there. Then we're gonna put up some carrots and some sweet herbs and some onions. And then we're going to go ahead and use our spices, and it calls for salt, whole pepper, mace, and nutmeg. We're gonna layer all that stuff in here, and then we're gonna even add some more. So next it calls for pigeon. I'm not gonna add any poultry to this. They make it feel kind of optional because later in the recipe, they even say whatever fowl you have, if you want to. So I'm not gonna do any fowl today. The next thing I'm gonna put in this is mushrooms. And you can use whatever you want. It wants you to use truffle, it wants you to use morels. I don't have any of these expensive mushrooms that I can get here in Indiana right now. So I'm just going with baby portobellos. That's what we're gonna do, but we're gonna add plenty of them to get a lot of that earthy flavor in here. It calls for even more beef to come on next. And then we're gonna take our bread and we're gonna cut it into some slices and we're gonna toast it on both sides. That's gonna be the last layer on top. At this point, we're gonna cover the dish and we're gonna put it over a slow fire for a few minutes, just kind of let all that stuff sweat together. Then we're gonna take boiling water and we're gonna pour enough of it to cover everything in the dish, and then we're gonna put this over a fire and it's gonna cook for a very long time. What we're doing here is we're just trying to pack as much flavor as possible in this, and then the recipe even calls for you to then strain that out, all those ingredients, and then pour your broth into something else, and then do it again. So use all those same ingredients, fill it back up with water, and then cook it down again. So this is gonna be a lot of ingredients that we're seemingly kind of wasting, even though we can use this all for something after the fact, but it's gonna make 2 big batches of broth, and then you'll have all these different pieces of meat that's kind of cut up that you can put into pies, or you can feed the animals. You can do all sorts of things with that as well. This recipe highlights one of the unsung heroes from all the ingredients that you can possibly choose from, cauliflower. Now, some people absolutely love cauliflower, and some people just hate it. And there's probably not anywhere in between. You have pretty hard stances on cauliflower typically, but it does celebrate kind of the versatility within this cookbook. It feels like Hannah Glasse was thinking about absolutely everything, and that's why this cookbook is so darn popular. So she's putting your table together, and she's giving you main dishes, she's giving you side dishes. She has a lot of desserts in here, and this is one of those side dishes that you could eat this and this could be your only thing for a particular meal that you're going to eat, but it works alongside with a good main dish really well. Cauliflower can eat very heartily. It has a lot of body to it still, but it's a vegetable, and it's nice to be able to check that box and say, I got my vegetable in for the day. So let's get right into this recipe. To Ragoo cauliflowers, lay a large cauliflower in water, then pick it to pieces. As if for pickling, take a 1/4 pound of butter with a spoonful of water and melt it in the stew pan. Then throw in your cauliflowers and shake them about often till they are quite tender. With a little pepper and salt, pour in 1/2 pint of good gravy. Let them stew till the sauce is thick, and pour it all out into a little dish. Save a few little bits of cauliflower when stewed in the butter to garnish with. To cook this ragu of cauliflower, the first thing we're gonna do is get some water in a bowl and get our cauliflower in that water so that we can pick this apart and it's not gonna turn crazy colors or anything like that on us. Okay, then we're gonna get our skillet over the fire and we're gonna get about a 1/4 pound of butter in there with, it says a spoonful of water. I did about 4 ounces of water. And once that all gets melted down, we're gonna put our cauliflower in the pot and slowly just cook this. It's not something that you're gonna be able to do really quickly. We don't wanna burn anything. And we also don't wanna cook this down until nothing because we want something to bite into there. As this is cooking and it's going along, it's gonna take a little while. You're just gonna kind of shake your pan a little bit, stir it up, make sure it's moving. Eventually you're gonna add a little bit of flour, salt, and pepper to this. And we want that to start to thicken up a little bit before we add our good gravy. Once we add that, if it doesn't feel like it's thick enough, you can sprinkle a little bit more flour in there, depending on how loose you want that sauce to be. I kind of like a ragu that eats like almost like a stew. It's pretty thick. After we cook that down, the sauce starts to thicken, then it's done. We can just take it out and put it into our bowl for presentation. If you want to, towards the beginning of this process, when you've just kind of stirred this cauliflower around in the butter water, you can take a couple pieces out for presentation's sake. But you know, if you're not worried about how good it looks when it comes to the table, don't even worry about that. Here it is. It doesn't look like anything spectacular. It just looks like it's gonna be yummy. But you know, when something comes to the table and it's just kind of like, hey, here's the fuzzy white things with a brown sauce on it, it doesn't look great. But let's give it a try, see how it tastes. Man, okay, it packs a punch right away because you've got all this fat in there, right? And then you combine that with the gravy. And then if you cook it over a smoking fire, it's gonna take a lot of that flavor in. So if you're gonna make this, make it outside. Really, it's worth it. Because that smokiness really gets absorbed by the cauliflower and it pulls it all together. It tastes fun, almost exotic that way, rather than just I'm eating vegetables.
Before The Art of Cookery was published, Hannah Glasse was not a rich person, she wasn't a famous person, she wasn't well known as a cook or as a chef or anything like that. She was born in 1708 to a landowner and his mistress. Not the best situation ever. She grew up in sort of the London area, and while her family was, let's say, upper middle class, it wasn't financially stable. There was certainly issues within her family. She didn't get along with her mother all that well. After her mother died, her father had bad health, so she spent some time with her grandmother. At the age of 16, Hannah Glasse gets married without the family's permission to a half-pay Irish officer of the age of 30. So not probably the best situation. And they have a difficult time with finances, her and her husband. She has 10 children, but only 5 of them survive into adulthood. While they're struggling financially and undoubtedly with some health issues with her husband, she tries out a couple of different occupations. She wants to sell, say, patent medicines. That doesn't work out so well. Then she starts to work on the cookbook as another means of making money. The year that the cookbook is published, her husband dies. But she also starts another business. She starts a dressmaking business in London, and it does fairly well, probably building up that business off the proceeds of the cookbook. This cookbook in 1747 really kind of takes off right away. She starts off with 200 subscribers. Basically, the idea of getting your book prepaid, or she pre-sells the cookbook. And she has those people that were the subscribers to her cookbook listed in the front. Sort of really a take on a way a lot of things are done today in pre-selling items. Before the year is out, they have to print more copies. So the cookbook is immediately successful. And over the 18th century, more than 20 editions were done of the cookbook. She herself, in her dressmaking business, while it got kind of very big, and she even advertised her dressmaking business in the 4th edition to the cookbook, that dressmaking business really drives her into bankruptcy. By 1754, she is 10,000 pounds in debt. That's a lot of money in the 18th century, and she is bankrupt. She has to sell off the rights or the copyright to her cookbook. So she kind of loses control over that in 1754, 1755. It goes on to continue to be printed over and over again. She has even more troubles with debts, and she is put in debtor's prison. She goes to the Marshalsea and is later on transferred to the Fleet prison. She does get out of that within 6 months to a year, and by 1760, she is trying again with cookbooks. She does the Confectioner's Dictionary, and she does a book on how to deal with servants. Neither one of these books is very popular. There's not much known about her life after 1760. We do have a death announcement in 1770. So there are a lot of struggles in Hannah Glasse's life. This amazingly famous cookbook comes from somebody who has all these troubles, and it's not an amazing rags to riches story, but it does tell us a lot about the 18th century life here. Hannah Glasse, even though she was a widow, she started multiple businesses. She had the cookbook, she tried other books, she had the dressmaking business that she started with her daughter. So there's a lot to learn and understand about what's going on in the 18th century, just from Hannah Glasse's life specifically.
This recipe from the Hannah Glasse cookbook, it's really neat because what we're doing here is we're trying to showcase how much she covers, but also this is one of those dishes that could be, this is the main dish, this could be breakfast, this could be a dessert, it's everything. And you can use it any time of day, any day that you want. Some people will make it like a fritter, some people will make it more like a German pancake. We're gonna go that route today, but it's a really interesting and hopefully delicious recipe. To make apple frazes, cut your apples in thick slices and fry them with fine light brown. Take them up and lay them to drain. Keep them as whole as you can and either pare them or let alone. Then make a batter as follows. Take 5 eggs, leaving out 2 whites. Beat them up with cream and flour and a little sack. And make it the thickness of pancake batter. Pour in a little melted butter, nutmeg, and a little sugar. Let your batter be hot and drop your fritters. And on every one lay a slice of apple and then more batter on them. Fry them of a fine light brown. Take them up and strew some double refined sugar all over them. Now this might sound a little complicated, but it's really not. And she uses batter, meaning oil, it seems like here. Basically what she's saying is you want the oil in your pan to be thick enough that everything doesn't settle on the bottom of the skillet like a pancake, unless you want to make it like German pancakes and then you just scratch that part of it. So you can make this into fritters or you can make it into a stuffed pancake. And another interesting thing about this recipe is usually when you see apples being used in this time period, they tell you specifically to pare them. She leaves it up to you. I'm going to leave them with the skin on just because I never get to. And I think it's going to help hold those apples into better pieces. If you take the skin off, they tend to break apart a little bit more. The first thing we want to do when making this recipe is just go ahead and get our apples cut up and cored. And then we're going to put those in a pan with a little bit of butter to cook. Now, depending on what you want to do and the end result that you want to have with this recipe, you can make these slices as large or as small as you want to, but you want to make sure that they cook well, but they're not falling apart. We don't want just like an apple mush at the end of this. Next, we're going to take all of our ingredients, all of the wet ingredients for the pancake, and we're going to combine all of those, whisk it up, and get that ready to go. Then we're just going to add flour, keep stirring until it's the right thickness. The batter is looking just like you want it to. Get your skillet back over the fire, get some butter in there, and get it nice and hot. And then, you know, all of this, the rest of this is about what you want. Do you want large pancakes? Do you want small pancakes? Whatever. But go ahead and get your batter in the pan, get your apples in there, and then some batter back on top of what you've just poured, basically making an apple sandwich out of this batter. And then at that point, you're just going to cook them until they're golden brown and they're ready to go. When they come out of the skillet, put some sugar over top and take it to the table. Okay, so here it is. Here is our fraise. Now, she gives us options of how we want to do this, and I thought I'm going to make a little, like almost like a crepe wrap with apples on the inside. So that's what I've done here. I think it's going to be good. It smells really good. The only thing that's on it for, you know, any extra flavor is some sugar. There's no sauce or anything like that. And the apples are in the middle, so I'm going to go ahead and cut right in the middle here and take a chunk out so we can try it with everything cooked together. It tastes exactly like a pancake with apples in the middle. And it's actually, it's really good. It's really, really good. This would be a great snack to do with your kids, something fun that they can help you cook with. This is the kind of stuff that I like to cook with my kids. I think that you'll really enjoy it. It's definitely worthwhile. If you're doing it at home, ways to spice it up, maybe put a little bit of sugar with the apples when you're initially cooking them, but she didn't call for that in this period context. And then I actually like the little apple burrito thing. I think it's fun, whimsical. Kids will like it, so try it at home. It's really good.
Now, we will find some surprising things in this cookbook. So it's well known that English cookery in the 18th century was sort of overcooked, especially say the greens. They would just cook them until there were nothing left. But yet, listen to this little recipe inside her cookbook, more like a direction. She says, directions concerning garden things. Most people spoil garden things by overboiling them. All things that are green should have a little crispness, for if they are overboiled, they neither have any sweetness or any beauty. There's some really good advice in this cookbook, even though it is, 250, 300 years old. There are several different reactions to Hannah Glasse's cookbook in the 18th century. Some people didn't think it was written by a woman. In fact, for the first several editions, it just says by a lady. It doesn't have Hannah Glasse's name on it. And some people were sure that a man wrote the cookbook because only men are capable of writing about cooking. Well, obviously we know that isn't true. Also, we have a cookbook here called Professed Cookery by Anne Cook. And basically, this is a refutation of all of the art of cookery. She kind of goes through the recipes one by one and says, this is why this one's wrong, this is why that one's wrong. It's hilarious to read all her critiques of Hannah Glasse's cookbook. But the reality is Hannah Glasse's cookbook was popular, Anne Cook's was not. On almost any topic in 18th century cookery, doesn't matter what it is, this book will influence your ideas about what it means to people in that time period. It is the one to have if you want to try to understand. Is it easy to read? No. In fact, the recipes are nothing like a modern recipe cookbook. We think of lists of ingredients and exact amounts. We think of these intense directions and exactly how to serve it and what temperature and how long to cook it. None of that is in this cookbook. It's like a word problem that's in math, or just almost a simple description of what these foods are like. That's what we actually read about here. But this is what the cooks of the 18th century had to work with, and this is what our recipe books come out of.
Our cooking time is finished right here on this, well, it's not a cullis, but this broth that is supposed to mimic a cullis. And you know, you lift the lid up and you're like, well, that's what all this work went into. And it doesn't really matter what this looks like. It only matters what it tastes like, because all of this stuff that's in the pot is going to go away except for the liquid. Now, once we pour everything out of this pot and we take the liquid and we jar that up, we're going to put everything back into the pot, fill it up with water yet again, and we're going to get as many servings of this broth as we possibly can out of what's here.
Thank you, Ryan, for coming up with all these different recipes, trying them out today. This particular one I'm interested in because she spends so much time. In fact, it's probably the longest, most intense recipe in the entire book, and it's within the first page or two. So this is one of the quintessential points of the book, is that you can make inexpensive parts of dishes or dishes instead of this highly complex French cooking that was so popular in the time period.
Right, and so expensive.
Yes.
And so we get to the idea of a cullis with much fewer ingredients and a lot less trouble, right? But when you look at this, it's so complex and thick, and it comes through in just appearance. I think that when we get in here, we're not going to be able to say, oh, well, that's the bacon, that's the beef. It's all going to be combined. And then even all those herbs, like when you smell it, you smell the herbs right away. So I'm interested to see what it's going to taste like.
Let's give it a try. Yes, it's not a standalone component. This is a fantastic base and sauce component that she will end up, basically, you know, you can use this in probably, you know, a third of the recipes that show up in the cookbook.
It's funny how the vegetables and the herbs are what come through the most. And like all of that beef stock that was created out of this and all the bacon that's so far in the background, and it just tastes really bright. It doesn't look that way. It's so dark and dense, right? But man, is it good.
Yeah. This cookbook is available on our website with many other 18th century cookbooks. It's not the easiest thing to read or to make food from, but it is the basis of all our modern cookbooks.